Scorned for her simple dress at a millionaire's party, she stays silent, not knowing she's the Mafia boss's heir. The rain fell over Manhattan like a curtain of silver needles, drumming against the windows of the Kensington Grand Hotel. Inside, chandeliers dripped light across marble floors, illuminating hundreds of guests dressed in silk, velvet, and diamonds, worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. Laughter echoed through the ballroom. Champagne flowed like water, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and ambition. Elena Russo stood near the entrance, her fingers clutching a small handbag that had seen better days. Her dress was simple, a navy blue cotton piece she had bought at a thrift store 3 years ago. It was clean, pressed, and the nicest thing she owned. But in this room, surrounded by gowns that cost more than her annual salary, she might as well have been wearing rags. She was 26 years old, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders and eyes the color of autumn leaves. There was something quiet about her, something that made people overlook her in crowds. Tonight, she wished she could disappear entirely. Her best friend, Mia Chen, had insisted she come. Mia worked as an assistant to one of the event organizers and had managed to get Elena on the guest list. It was supposed to be an opportunity, a chance to network, to meet people who might help her struggling catering business get off the ground. Instead, Elena felt like an intruder in a world that would never accept her. She had been standing alone for nearly 20 minutes when a group of women approached her. Their leader was a tall blonde in a red Valentino gown, her lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. Victoria Ashworth. Elena recognized her from the society pages, daughter of a real estate mogul, engaged to some investment banker, perpetually featured in articles about Manhattan's elite. Victoria's eyes traveled over Elena's dress with deliberate slowness. Her friends giggled behind manicured hands. "Oh my," Victoria said, her voice carrying just enough to draw nearby attention. "Did someone get lost on their way to a PTA meeting? Darling, this is the Kensington Charity Gala, not a community bake sale." Eleanor's cheeks burned, but she kept her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that showing weakness only encouraged predators. "I was invited," she said quietly. "Were you?" Victoria's eyebrows rose in exaggerated surprise. "How fascinating. I didn't realize they were giving out invitations at bus stops now." More laughter. Eleanor felt the eyes of dozens of guests turning toward them, watching the spectacle unfold. "Perhaps someone should escort her out," one of Victoria's friends suggested, "before she embarrasses herself further. I mean, look at that dress. It's practically vintage and not in a good way." Elena's hands tightened on her bag. She thought of all the responses she could give, all the cutting remarks that sat on the tip of her tongue. But what would be the point? These women lived in a different universe. Nothing she said would matter to them, so she stayed silent. She simply looked at Victoria with calm, steady eyes and said nothing at all. Something flickered across Victoria's face. Uncertainty, perhaps, or irritation that her target wasn't playing along. "Nothing to say for yourself?" Victoria pressed. "Cat got your tongue? Or perhaps you're just too simple to understand when you're being addressed by your betters." The ballroom had grown quieter. Eleanor could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her from all sides. She was about to turn and leave, to walk out of this golden prison and never look back, when a voice cut through the whispers. "That's quite enough." The voice was deep, authoritative, and carried the kind of power that made people instinctively step aside. Eleanor turned to see a man emerging from the crowd. He was tall, perhaps 6'3", with broad shoulders beneath a perfectly tailored black suit. His hair was dark, threaded with silver at the temples, and his face was angular and striking, the kind of face that belonged on ancient coins or Renaissance paintings. But it was his eyes that held Elena frozen. They were grey, the colour of storm clouds, and they were fixed on Victoria with an intensity that made the blonde woman visibly pale. "Mr. DeLuca," Victoria stammered, her confident facade crumbling. We were simply having a conversation." "I heard your conversation." The man, DeLuca, stepped closer. And Victoria actually took a step back. "I heard every word, and I find myself wondering why one of my guests is being harassed in my family's hotel." His family's hotel. Eleanor's breath caught. The Kensington Grand was owned by the DeLuca family, one of the oldest and most powerful dynasties on the East Coast. Their wealth was legendary, their influence extending from real estate to finance, to industries that polite society didn't discuss. And this man, with his storm-grey eyes and commanding presence, was clearly its patriarch. "I meant no offense," Victoria said quickly, all traces of her earlier cruelty replaced by simpering deference. "It was just a misunderstanding." A little harmless fun. Harmless. DeLuca's voice was soft, but there was something beneath it that made Elena's skin prickle. Is that what you call it? Mocking a woman for her clothes? For having the courage to walk into a room where she knows she'll be judged by people who measure worth in thread count? Victoria opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Let me be clear, DeLuca continued. Miss Ashworth, your father has business dealings with my organization. Those dealings depend entirely on my goodwill. Do you understand what I'm saying? Victoria's face had gone from pale to ashen. Yes, of course, I understand completely. Good, understand. Then I suggest you apologize to this young woman and remove yourself from my sight. For a moment, Victoria looked as though she might argue, but something in DeLuca's eyes must have convinced her otherwise. She turned to Eleanor, her jaw tight with suppressed humiliation. I apologize, she forced out. I was out of line. Before Elena could respond, Victoria was already retreating, her friends scurrying after her like frightened mice. The crowd slowly returned to their conversations, though Elena could still feel curious glances darting her way. She stood frozen, unsure what to do or say. DeLuca turned to her, and his expression shifted, the hard edge softening into something almost gentle. Are you all right? He asked. Eleanor found her voice. Yes, thank you. You didn't have to do that. Of course I did. He studied her face with unsettling intensity. May I ask your name? Elena Russo. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. Surprise, she couldn't tell, but it was gone so quickly she thought she might have imagined it. Elena Russo, he repeated slowly, as if tasting each syllable. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Dominic DeLuca. I know who you are. The words came out before she could stop them. I mean, everyone knows who you are. Your family is infamous, he suggested, a ghost of a smile playing at his lips. I was going to say well-known. A diplomatic answer. He gestured toward the far side of the ballroom, where a private alcove offered respite from the crowd. Would you allow me to buy you a drink, as an apology for my fellow guest's behavior? Every instinct Elena possessed told her to refuse. Dominic DeLuca was dangerous, not in the way Victoria Ashworth was dangerous. With her petty cruelties and social machinations, his danger was something deeper, more fundamental. The kind of man who could end careers with a phone call, who moved through the world as though its rules didn't apply to him. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of genuine interest, perhaps even kindness, that made her hesitate. All right, she heard herself say. One drink. They settled into a corner booth, separated from the main ballroom by velvet curtains and the discreet distance that wealth could buy. A waiter appeared instantly, placing a glass of red wine in front of Elena without being asked. You knew what I'd order, she said. I guessed. You don't seem like the champagne type. She wasn't sure if that was an insult or a compliment. With this man, it was impossible to tell. So, Elena Russo, Dominic said, swirling his own drink. Whiskey, she noted, expensive and amber gold. What brings you to my family's charity gala? My friend got me an invitation. She thought it might help my business. What kind of business? Catering. Small events, mostly. Birthday parties, anniversaries. Nothing like this. She gestured at the opulent ballroom. I'm not exactly in the right tax bracket. And yet here you are. And yet here I am. She met his eyes. Making a fool of myself in front of Manhattan's finest. You didn't make a fool of yourself. You showed more dignity in that moment than every other person in this room combined. He leaned forward slightly. Do you know what I noticed about you, Elena? Before Victoria and her pack descended? She shook her head. You were watching, he said, not trying to impress anyone or network or climb the social ladder. You were just observing, like an anthropologist studying a foreign species. That's one way to put it. Most people who come to these events are desperate to be seen. They wear their ambition like perfume, but you were trying to be invisible. His grey eyes bore into hers. Why? Elena was quiet for a long moment. There was something about this man that made her want to tell the truth, to peel back the careful layers of privacy she had built over years of struggle and disappointment. Because I don't belong here, she finally said, and I know it. I've always known it. My whole life I've been on the outside looking in at worlds like this. I used to think that if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself, I could earn my way inside. But tonight, she shook her head. Tonight reminded me that some doors stay closed no matter how hard you knock. Dominic was silent, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. What if I told you, he said slowly, that you belong here more than anyone else in this room? Eleanor laughed, a short, bitter sound. I'd say you're either crazy or trying very hard to seduce me. Neither, His voice was serious. "Elena, there's something I need to tell you. Something that's going to change everything you think you know about your life." The air between them seemed to thicken. Eleanor's heart began to beat faster, though she couldn't have said why. "What are you talking about?" Before Dominic could answer, a man appeared at the edge of their alcove. Dark-suited, earpiece visible, the unmistakable bearing of a bodyguard. "Sir," the man said quietly, "there's a situation that requires your attention." Dominic's jaw tightened with obvious frustration. He turned back to Eleanor. "I have to handle this. But this conversation isn't over." He reached into his jacket and produced a card, heavy cream paper, embossed with a phone number and nothing else. "Call me tomorrow. There's something you need to know about your family, about who you really are." "My family?" Eleanor's confusion deepened. "I don't have any family. My parents died when I was a baby. I grew up in foster care." Something shifted in Dominic's expression. "Grief, perhaps, or guilt. That's what you were told," he said. "But it isn't the complete truth. Elena, your father was my closest friend. His name was Marco Russo, and he was one of the most powerful men in this organization. When he died, he left everything to you. His legacy, his fortune, his seat at our table." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "That's impossible." "It's not. And there are people who know it, people who have been watching you, waiting for the right moment." Dominic stood, straightening his jacket. "You're in danger, Elena. You've been in danger your whole life without knowing it. That's why I had to find you tonight." "Find me? You knew I'd be here. I've known where you were for years. I've been protecting you from a distance, waiting until I could approach you safely." He glanced at his bodyguard, then back at her. "Tomorrow, call me. I'll explain everything." And then he was gone, swallowed by the crowd and the noise and the glittering chaos of the gala. Helena sat alone in the alcove, her wine untouched, Dominic's card clutched in her trembling hand. Her mind raced through everything he'd said, trying to make sense of words that felt like they belonged in a different reality. Her father, a powerful man, an organization, inheritance, danger. It was absurd. It had to be some kind of elaborate joke, or a cruel trick, or the delusions of a man who'd had too much whiskey. But when she closed her eyes, she could still see the way Dominic had looked at her, with recognition, with concern, with something that might have been responsibility. And she remembered something else. A memory so old it was more like a dream. A man's voice, deep and warm, singing her to sleep in a language she didn't understand. Strong arms holding her against a broad chest, the smell of cedar and tobacco, and a promise whispered against her hair. "Ti proteggerò sempre, piccola mia. I will always protect you. My little one." Elena's eyes opened. What if it was true? She looked down at the card in her hand. Tomorrow everything might change. Tomorrow she might learn the truth about who she was and where she came from. But tonight she was still just a girl in a simple dress, surrounded by strangers in a world that wasn't hers. She slipped the card into her bag, stood, and walked out of the Kensington Grand Hotel. The rain had stopped. Above the glittering towers of Manhattan, stars were beginning to emerge, distant and cold and beautiful. Elena took a deep breath of the cool night air and began the long walk home. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. If you're not, now is the moment, because this story is only getting started and Elena's life is about to transform in ways she never imagined. Subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next. Chapter 2. Elena didn't sleep that night. She lay in her tiny apartment in Queens, staring at the water-stained ceiling, turning Dominic DeLuca's words over in her mind like stones in a tumbler. By the time grey dawn light began seeping through her window, she had convinced herself at least a dozen times that the whole encounter had been some kind of fever dream. But the card was real. She could feel its weight in her pocket, heavy with implications she wasn't ready to face. She went through her morning routine on autopilot. Coffee, shower, the same clothes she wore every day to her small commercial kitchen in Brooklyn. Her catering business, Russo's Table, occupied a modest space in a building that had seen better decades. The equipment was second-hand, the rent was just barely manageable, and most months she wondered if she'd be able to keep the lights on. But it was hers. She had built it from nothing, with no family connections, no trust fund, no safety net. Whatever Dominic DeLuca thought he knew about her past, this present was something she had earned. Her assistant, a cheerful young woman named Rosa, was already there when Elena arrived. "You look terrible," Rosa announced with characteristic bluntness. "Rough night?" "Something like that." "Did the gala go okay? Any good contacts?" Eleanor thought of Victoria Ashworth's sneering face. of Dominic's storm-grey eyes, of revelations that had turned her understanding of herself inside out. It was eventful. Rosa waited for more details, but Elena was already pulling on her apron and surveying the day's prep list. They had a corporate lunch to cater. 50 people, nothing fancy but enough to pay next month's rent. The work was a welcome distraction. Eleanor lost herself in the familiar rhythms of the kitchen, chopping, sautéing, plating, the precise choreography she had perfected over years of practice. By the time the van was loaded and Rosa was pulling out of the parking lot, Elena had almost convinced herself that she could ignore Dominic's card forever. Then her phone rang. Unknown number, but somehow she knew. Hello? Elena. Dominic's voice was unmistakable. Deep, measured, carrying that undertone of authority that seemed as natural to him as breathing. I was hoping you'd call, but I understand if you need time. I wasn't going to call, she admitted. I know, that's why I'm calling you instead. A pause. We need to talk in person. There are things I can't explain over the phone. How do I know this isn't some kind of con, some elaborate scheme to, I don't know, steal my identity or get me involved in something criminal? She heard what might have been a soft laugh. If I wanted to harm you, Elena, I've had 26 years to do it. I've been watching over you since you were a baby, not because I want anything from you, but because I made a promise to your father. A promise. Elena's voice was flat. To a dead man. To my dead friend. The best man I ever knew. The warmth had faded from Dominic's voice, replaced by something raw. Marco saved my life 3 times before he was 30. He was the brother I chose, and when he died, I swore I would keep his daughter safe, no matter what it cost me, no matter how long it took. Elena's throat tightened. There was too much pain in those words to be manufactured. Why now, she asked. If you've been watching me for so long, why approach me now? Because circumstances have changed. People who shouldn't know about you have started asking questions. Your existence has become known, and that makes you a target. A target for what? For people who want what your father left behind. His wealth, his connections, his place in our organization, everything that rightfully belongs to you. Elena sank onto a crate of produce, her legs suddenly unsteady. I don't want any of that. I don't want money or power or whatever it is you people deal in. I just want my life, my kitchen, my work. I understand. And I won't force you into anything. Dominic's voice gentled. But you deserve to know the truth. After that, whatever you decide, I'll respect it. Please, let me explain in person. She should have said no. Every instinct she had cultivated through years of independence screamed at her to hang up. Throw away the card. Pretend this conversation had never happened. But underneath the fear and the suspicion, something else stirred. A hunger she hadn't even known she possessed. For answers, for connection, for the family she had spent her whole life pretending she didn't need. Where? She heard herself say. An hour later, Elena stood outside a brownstone in the West Village. It was beautiful. Ivy climbing the brick facade, windows framed by dark green shutters, a wrought iron fence enclosing a small garden. Nothing about it suggested danger or criminality or the shadow world Dominic had hinted at. The door opened before she could knock. Dominic stood in the entrance, dressed more casually than the night before, a charcoal sweater, dark trousers, but no less imposing. His grey eyes swept over her with that unsettling intensity she was beginning to recognize. "Thank you for coming," he said simply, and stepped aside to let her in. The interior of the brownstone was warm and refined. Hardwood floors, oriental rugs, walls lined with books and artwork. It felt more like a scholar's retreat than a crime lord's lair. Eleanor found herself relaxing slightly as Dominic led her to a study at the back of the house. "Please sit." He gestured to a leather armchair near the fireplace, where a small fire crackled despite the mild spring weather. "Can I offer you something to drink? Coffee? Tea?" "No, thank you." Eleanor perched on the edge of the chair, too tense to settle in. "I just want answers." Dominic nodded and took the chair across from her. For a long moment he simply looked at her, not with the predatory assessment she might have expected, but with something closer to wonder. "You look so much like him," he said softly. "Your father. You have his eyes, his mouth, even some of his expressions. When I saw you at the gala, it was like seeing a ghost." Elena's chest ached. She had no pictures of her parents, no memories, nothing but the vague impression of warmth and safety that haunted her dreams. "Tell me about him," she said. "Tell me everything." Dominic leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the fire. "Marco Russo was born in Sicily," he began. "His family had interests there, historical interests, going back generations. When he was 18, he came to America with nothing but a suitcase and his father's name. By the time he was 30, he had built an empire. An empire, Elena repeated. You mean a criminal empire? Dominic met her eyes. I won't lie to you, Elena. Your father operated outside the law. He controlled territories, collected debts, protected businesses that couldn't rely on the police. But he also built hospitals, funded schools, kept neighborhoods safe when the authorities couldn't or wouldn't. He was complicated. Most powerful men are. And you? What are you? I was his second in command, his consigliere, if you want the traditional term. When Marco died, I took over the organization. I've been running it ever since. Elena absorbed this, trying to reconcile the cultured man before her with the violent world he described. How did my father die? Dominic's expression darkened. That's where the story becomes difficult. He rose and walked to a desk in the corner of the room. From a drawer, he retrieved a leather folder worn with age. He hesitated for a moment, then handed it to Elena. Your mother was an American, he said. Sarah Mitchell. She was a journalist, investigating corruption in city government. That's how she met Marco. She was researching one of his business partners. Elena opened the folder. Inside were photographs, a younger version of the man who had haunted her dreams. Dark-haired and handsome, standing beside a beautiful woman with auburn hair and a bright smile. In several of the pictures, the woman was holding a baby. They fell in love, Dominic continued, against all odds, against all advice. Marco knew the risks of bringing an outsider into our world, but Sarah was extraordinary, brave, brilliant, fiercely independent. She reminded me of you, actually. Elena touched the photograph with trembling fingers. Her mother, her father, the family she had never known. What happened to them? Dominic sat down heavily, as if the weight of the story was physically pressing on him. There was a rival faction, men who wanted to take over Marco's territory, who saw his relationship with Sarah as a weakness to exploit. They made their move when you were just a year old, and he paused. Your parents were killed in what was made to look like a car accident. The only reason you survived was that your nanny had taken you out for a walk that morning. By the time she returned, it was over. Elena felt tears sliding down her cheeks, though she couldn't remember starting to cry. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why did I grow up in foster care believing I was an orphan with no one? Because hiding you was the only way to keep you safe. Dominic's voice was heavy with old grief. The men who killed your parents were never caught. They're still out there, still powerful. If they'd known Marco's heir had survived, they would have hunted you down. So we erased you, changed your name in the system, altered records, made sure you disappeared into the foster care bureaucracy where no one would think to look. But you knew. You knew where I was all along. Yes, I had people watching over you, always at a distance, always invisible. When you needed money for culinary school, an anonymous scholarship appeared. When your landlord tried to evict you 3 years ago, he suddenly changed his mind. When that man you dated in college became aggressive, he found himself transferred to a job across the country. Elena stared at him. That was you? All of it? Your father asked me to protect you. I've done everything in my power to honor that promise. The fire crackled in the silence. Elena tried to process the magnitude of what she was hearing. A lifetime of invisible guardianship, a legacy of violence and power, a family she had never known she had. You said I'm in danger now, she said finally. What changed? Dominic's jaw tightened. 6 months ago, one of the men responsible for your parents' deaths resurfaced, Victor Castellano. He's been asking questions, searching archives, bribing officials. Somehow, he's gotten close to the truth. Close to you? What does he want? What he's always wanted. Control of the organization your father built, and the surest way to claim that control is to eliminate Marco's bloodline once and for all. Elena felt cold, despite the fire's warmth. So I'm just supposed to, what, hide forever? Change my name again? Disappear into another life? No. Dominic leaned forward, his grey eyes intent. There's another option. You claim what's yours. What? Your father left everything to you, Elena. Not just money, though there's plenty of that, but position, authority, a seat at the table where decisions are made. He paused. If you step into your inheritance, if you let the world know who you are, Castellano loses his leverage. He can't claim an organization that already has an heir, and you would have the protection of every man and woman loyal to your father's memory. You're asking me to become, what, a mob boss? I'm asking you to become who you were always meant to be, a leader, a force, someone who can turn your father's legacy into something better. Dominic's voice softened. I've watched you for years, Elena. I've seen how you treat the people who work for you, how you fight for every inch of success, how you refuse to compromise your principles even when it costs you. You have Marco's strength and Sarah's heart. You could change everything." Eleanor stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, the street was quiet and tree-lined, utterly ordinary. The world she had known until yesterday, a world of struggle and small victories and simple dreams, seemed very far away. "I need time," she said, "to think." "Of course." Dominic rose as well. "Take all the time you need. But Elena, be careful. Castellano's people are watching. Until you decide what to do, please let me assign someone to keep an eye on you, just as a precaution." Eleanor wanted to refuse. She had spent her entire life relying on no one but herself, and the thought of accepting protection from this man and his organization felt like surrendering something precious. But she remembered her father's voice in her dreams. "Ti proteggerò sempre, piccola mia." Maybe it was time to let someone else share that burden. "Okay," she said quietly, "just until I figure this out." Dominic nodded, something like relief flickering across his features. "I'll have someone meet you at your kitchen tomorrow. His name is Marcus. He's been with my organization for 20 years, and there's no one I trust more." Elena gathered her things, pausing at the study door. "Dominic," she said, and it was the first time she had used his name. "Why are you doing this? You've been running things for 26 years. Why would you want to give that up to someone you've never even met?" He was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "Because power was never what I wanted," he said finally. "It was what I inherited when Marco died. I've done my best to honor his vision, to keep his people safe, to prepare for the day when someone worthy could take his place." He looked at her, and she saw decades of loneliness and duty in his grey eyes. "You're that someone, Elena. I've known it since the day you were born. Your father knew it too. Why do you think he named you his heir before he died?" Eleanor had no answer to that. She simply nodded and walked out into the fading afternoon light. The walk back to the subway was a blur. Her mind was too full, her heart too heavy to pay attention to her surroundings. She descended the stairs to the platform on autopilot, swiping her Metro card without conscious thought. She didn't notice the man watching her from the shadows until the train had already pulled away. Chapter 3. 2 weeks passed. Eleanor tried to continue her normal routine, catering events, managing invoices, pretending that her entire understanding of her life hadn't been shattered like glass. It wasn't working. Every morning, Marcus appeared at her kitchen, a solid, quiet presence in his 50s with a face that had seen too much and eyes that missed nothing. He never intruded, never tried to make conversation. He simply watched and waited, a guardian she hadn't asked for but was beginning to appreciate, because things had started happening. Small things at first, a sense of being followed on her way home, hang-up calls in the middle of the night, a car that seemed to pass her building too often to be coincidental. Then 3 days ago, someone had broken into her apartment while she was at work. Nothing was taken, but everything had been searched. Drawers opened, closets rifled, papers scattered across her bed. A message, a warning. "You need to make a decision," Marcus told her that evening, his voice gentle despite its gruffness. "They know who you are now. Waiting only makes you more vulnerable." Eleanor knew he was right, but accepting Dominic's offer meant accepting a version of herself she wasn't sure she could become. It meant stepping into a world of violence and power that contradicted everything she had believed about who she wanted to be. She was still wrestling with that choice when her phone rang. "Elena," Dominic's voice was tense, "I need you to come to the brownstone. Now. Something's happened." 20 minutes later, she was back in the West Village study, but the warmth of her previous visit was gone. Dominic stood by the fireplace, his face drawn, flanked by 2 men she didn't recognize. "What is it?" Elena asked. "What's wrong?" Dominic turned to face her. In his hand was a photograph, a surveillance shot, grainy but clear enough to make out the figure in its center. It was her, walking down a Brooklyn street, unaware she was being watched. "This was delivered to my office this morning," Dominic said, along with a message from Victor Castellano. "What kind of message?" One of the men handed her a piece of paper. The words were typed, stark and unambiguous. "The Russo girl belongs to me. Hand her over or I will take her myself. You have 48 hours. Elena's hand shook as she lowered the note. "What does this mean?" "It means Castellano has decided to stop hiding," Dominic said grimly. "He's making his play. He believes that if he can control you, or eliminate you, he can force the rest of the organization to fall in line." "Control me how?" Dominic hesitated. "There are old traditions in our world. Marriage alliances. He could try to claim you as his wife, use your bloodline to legitimize his takeover. Eleanor felt sick. That's barbaric. It's the world your father lived in, the world that killed him. Dominic moved closer, his grey eyes searching her face. Eleanor, I won't let him touch you, but I need to know that you're willing to fight, that you'll stand up and claim what's yours before he can take it by force. And if I don't, if I just run, then he'll hunt you for the rest of your life. You'll never be safe, never be free, never be able to build the future you deserve. Dominic's voice dropped. And everything Marco worked for, everything he died for, will fall into the hands of the man who murdered him. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of impossible choices. Elena thought of her tiny apartment, her struggling business, the small life she had built from nothing. She thought of all the years she had spent alone, telling herself she didn't need anyone, that independence was the same as strength. But she also thought of her father's voice in her dreams, of the photographs in the leather folder, her mother's smile, her father's protective arm around them both, of the family she had lost before she ever knew them, and she felt something new stirring in her chest, not fear, not resignation, but something fiercer, something that had been sleeping inside her for 26 years, waiting for this moment. Okay, she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. Tell me what I need to do. The relief that washed over Dominic's face was almost worth the terror that gripped her heart. First, he said, we need to introduce you to the rest of the family. The next day, Elena found herself in a private room at a restaurant in Little Italy. Around a long table sat a dozen men and women, all watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to something like hope. Dominic introduced them one by one. There was Sophia, his second in command, a striking woman in her 40s, with silver-streaked hair and sharp intelligence in her dark eyes. There was Antonio, who ran their operations in New Jersey, and Lucia, who managed their legitimate business holdings. There were accountants and lawyers and people whose roles Dominic didn't specify, all bound together by loyalty to the organization her father had built. Many of you remember Marco Russo, Dominic said, addressing the table. You remember what he stood for, and strength tempered by honor, power used to protect rather than destroy. For 26 years I've tried to carry on his legacy, but the time has come for his true heir to take her place among us. He turned to Elena, and she felt the weight of every eye in the room. Elena, he said, this is your family now. They've been waiting for you longer than you know. Sophia was the first to speak, rising from her chair and approaching Elena with measured steps. You look just like him, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Marco was like a brother to me. I was there the night you were born. Did Dominic tell you that? Your father cried when he first held you, the most powerful man I'd ever known, and he wept like a child. She took Elena's hands in hers. Welcome home, Elena, we've missed you. One by one the others approached. Some offered handshakes, others embraces. An elderly man named Giuseppe actually kissed both her cheeks, tears streaming down his weathered face. Your grandmother was my cousin, he explained. You are the last of our blood. I never thought I'd live to see this day. Eleanor was overwhelmed. After a lifetime of loneliness, of believing she had no one, she was suddenly surrounded by people who claimed her as their own. It was too much, too fast. And yet, underneath the shock, she felt something loosening in her chest. A knot she hadn't even known was there, slowly beginning to unravel. After the meal, Dominic pulled her aside. There's one more person you need to meet, he said. Someone who's been waiting longer than anyone. He led her through the restaurant's kitchen to a private courtyard, where an old woman sat in a wheelchair beneath a flowering cherry tree. Her hair was white, her face lined with age, but her eyes, dark and penetrating, were as sharp as any Eleanor had seen. Nonna Maria, Dominic said gently. I've brought her. The old woman's eyes fixed on Eleanor, and something ancient and fierce blazed in their depths. Come closer, child, she said. Her voice was rough, accented, but warm beneath the gravel. Let me look at you. Eleanor approached, kneeling beside the wheelchair so she was at eye level with the old woman. Maria lifted a trembling hand and touched Eleanor's face, her cheek, her brow, her hair. My Marco's child, she whispered. I knew this day would come. I told them all, and my son's daughter lives. She will return to us. Her eyes filled with tears. I am your grandmother, Eleanor. Your father was my only son. Eleanor couldn't speak. She could only take the old woman's hands in hers and hold on, as if to something precious that might slip away. I have waited so long, Maria said. So long to hold you again. The last time I saw you, you were just a baby. They told me you were safe, that I had to let you go. But I never stopped praying, never stopped believing. I didn't know, Elena managed. I didn't know you existed. I know, child. I know. Maria pulled her close, surprisingly strong for her age. But now you're here. Now we're together. And nothing will take you from me again. They stayed like that for a long moment. Grandmother and granddaughter, separated by decades and tragedy, finally reunited under the falling petals of a cherry tree. When Elena finally pulled back, she found Dominic watching from the doorway with an expression she couldn't quite read. Grief, perhaps, or relief, or something more complicated than either. She's the last person alive who knew your parents, he said quietly. She's been waiting 26 years for this moment. Elena looked at her grandmother, this fierce old woman who had loved her father, who had prayed for her return, who had kept faith through decades of silence, and she knew with sudden certainty that there was no going back. Whatever happened next, whoever she had to become, she would not let these people down. She would not let her family down again. If this moment has touched your heart, leave a comment below saying family found. Let me know you're here, and let me know this story matters to you. Chapter 4. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Elena officially took her place as Marco Russo's heir in a ceremony that was part board meeting, part religious ritual. She signed documents transferring control of trust funds she hadn't known existed. She met lawyers and accountants who had been quietly managing her inheritance for decades. She learned the scope of what her father had built, a network of businesses both legitimate and otherwise, stretching from New York to Miami to Chicago. But more than the money or the power, what struck Elena was the loyalty. Everyone she met had a story about Marco, how he had helped them in hard times, how he had protected their families, how he had treated them with dignity when the rest of the world saw them as expendable. Your father believed in something, Sophia told her one evening, as they shared a bottle of wine in the brownstone study. Not just profit, not just power. He believed that people like us, immigrants, outsiders, people the system had failed, deserved protection, deserved a chance. And Castellano? Elena asked. What does he believe in? Sophia's expression hardened. Himself. Nothing more. He sees people as tools to be used and discarded. If he takes over, everything Marco built will be destroyed. Every person who depends on us will be left to fend for themselves. Then we can't let him win. No, Sophia agreed. We can't. The 48 hours Castellano had given them came and went. His response was swift and brutal. One of their warehouses in Brooklyn was firebombed. No one was hurt. The building had been empty, but the message was clear. He's testing us, Dominic said at an emergency meeting, seeing how we'll respond. Then we respond, Elena said. Her own voice surprised her, firm, certain, nothing like the uncertain woman who had walked into the Kensington Gala just weeks before. We show him that Marco Russo's heir isn't afraid. Dominic studied her with something like pride. What did you have in mind? Elena had been thinking about this, about the difference between the world she had known and the world she was entering, about what kind of leader she wanted to be. Castellano expects us to hit back with violence, she said. That's what he understands, what he's prepared for. But there's another kind of power he's not expecting. Go on. His businesses, the legitimate ones that give him cover, that let him move money and people and goods without attracting attention. What if we exposed them? Sophia leaned forward, interested. Expose them how? My mother was a journalist, Elena said. She spent her life uncovering corruption, bringing darkness into the light. Castellano has been operating in the shadows for 30 years. What if we dragged him into the sun? The room was silent. Elena could see the wheels turning behind Dominic's eyes. It's risky, he said finally. We'd be inviting outside attention. Law enforcement, media, people we can't control. But it would hurt him in ways he can't fight, Elena countered. You can rebuild a warehouse, you can't rebuild a reputation. And if the world sees him for what he really is, a murderer, a predator, a man who killed my parents, his allies will abandon him. More silence. Then, slowly, Dominic nodded. Your mother would have been proud, he said. Let's do it. They spent the next week gathering evidence. Elena reached out to journalists her mother had worked with, retired now, but still connected to networks of investigators and truth seekers. Sophia provided financial records, shell company documents, evidence of fraud and exploitation that stretched back decades. Marcus, ever vigilant, coordinated security as they moved information between safe houses. And through it all, Elena felt herself changing. The woman who had once been invisible, who had tried to disappear in crowds, was becoming someone new, someone who spoke and was heard, someone who made decisions and watched them ripple outward. She wasn't sure she liked it, but she was beginning to understand it. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Elena watched from the brownstone's study as every major news network ran the same headline: local business leader linked to decades of criminal activity. The evidence was irrefutable: financial records, witness testimony, a paper trail that connected Victor Castellano to everything from fraud to violence to the mysterious death of Marco Russo 26 years before. Within hours, 3 of Castellano's business partners had issued statements distancing themselves from him. His bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. 2 of his lieutenants were taken into custody for questioning. "It's working," Sophia said, watching the coverage with grim satisfaction. He's cornered." "Which makes him dangerous," Dominic warned. "A cornered animal fights hardest." He was right. The call came that evening. Elena answered without thinking, expecting one of her new contacts. Instead, she heard a voice like gravel and ice. Victor Castellano himself. "You think you've won," he said. His accent was faint but unmistakable, carrying echoes of the old country. "You think a few newspaper articles will stop me?" "I think the world is finally seeing who you really are," Elena replied. Her heart was racing, but she kept her voice steady. "The world sees what I want them to see, always has." Castellano laughed, a sound without humor. "You're just like your father. He thought he could change things too, thought he could build something clean in a dirty world. You know how that ended. I know you murdered him. I know you murdered my mother, and I know you're going to pay for it." Brave words from a little girl playing dress-up. His voice dropped to something colder. "I gave you a chance to come quietly. You chose war, so be it. But understand this, I don't lose. I've been doing this longer than you've been alive. I will take everything you have, everyone you love, and I will make you watch. Then, when you're begging for mercy, I'll show you the same kindness I showed Marco." The line went dead. Elena stood frozen, the phone clutched in her hand, her body trembling with a mix of fear and fury. Dominic appeared in the doorway. "What did he say?" she told him, watched his expression harden into something dangerous. "He's making a move tonight," Dominic said. "I can feel it. We need to get you somewhere safe." "No." Elena's voice surprised them both. "I'm done hiding. I've been hiding my whole life, and it didn't protect me. It just delayed the inevitable." She met Dominic's eyes. "I'm not my father. I'm not going to be killed while running away. If Castellano wants a fight, I'll give him one." For a long moment, Dominic said nothing. Then, slowly a smile spread across his weathered face. "You really are Marco's daughter," he said. "God help us all." Chapter 5. They came at midnight. Elena was at the brownstone, surrounded by Dominic and a dozen of his most trusted people, when the alarm went up. Vehicles approaching from multiple directions. Armed men surrounding the block. "How many?" Dominic demanded. 30 at least, Marcus reported. "More coming. He must have called in every favor he has left." Eleanor's heart pounded, but her mind was strangely clear. She looked around the room at the people who had sworn to protect her, these strangers who had become family in the space of a few short weeks. "We can't fight them all," she said. "Not without casualties. Not without giving Castellano exactly what he wants." "Then what do you suggest?" Sophia asked. Elena had been thinking about this too, about the difference between strength and violence, about what her father might have done, and what her mother would have wanted. "I suggest we don't fight at all." Dominic stared at her. "Elena, not the way he expects." She turned to Marcus. "The evidence we gave to the press, we kept copies, right? Everything, including the documents linking Castellano to my parents' deaths?" "Of course. And we have contacts in the FBI, the agents who have been investigating organized crime for years." "Yes, but call them now." Elena's voice was calm but commanding. "Tell them Victor Castellano is about to commit an armed assault on a private residence. Tell them to bring everyone they have." The room erupted in protests. This was insane. They couldn't trust the authorities. The organization had survived for decades by staying out of law enforcement's reach, but Dominic held up a hand, silencing the others. His grey eyes were fixed on Elena with an expression of dawning understanding. "You want to end it," he said slowly. "Not just stop Castellano. End the whole thing. The war, the violence, all of it." "Yes." Elena met his gaze without flinching. "My father built this organization to protect people, but the world has changed. There are other ways to protect people now. Legal ways, legitimate ways. If Castellano goes down tonight, if the FBI sees what he really is, we can use the chaos to restructure, to become something better. You'd give up the power Marco left you." "Power isn't what I want," Elena said. "It's never been what I wanted. I want my grandmother to live the rest of her life in peace. I want Rosa to not have to worry about being caught in someone else's war. I want to build something my parents would have been proud of, not because they were powerful, but because they loved each other, because they loved me." Dominic was silent for what felt like an eternity. Outside, Elena could hear engines, shouts, the ominous sounds of approaching violence. Then he nodded. "Make the call," he said to Marcus. "Bring the FBI." The next 20 minutes were the longest of Elena's life. She watched through the brownstone's reinforced windows as Castellano's men took positions around the block, preparing for an assault that would never come. Then sirens, dozens of them, wailing through the night like avenging angels. Black SUVs screeching onto the street from every direction. Federal agents in tactical gear, forming a perimeter around Castellano's forces. The voice that came through the megaphone was cold and official. "This is the FBI. You are surrounded. Lay down your weapons and surrender immediately." For a moment, Elena thought Castellano would fight anyway. His men hesitated, looking to their leader for guidance. Through the chaos, she caught a glimpse of him. An old man with silver hair and dead eyes, standing beside a black sedan, watching his empire crumble around him. Their eyes met across the distance. Even now she could feel his hatred radiating like heat from a furnace. But he was surrounded. His business partners had abandoned him. His evidence of corruption was on every television screen in the country. Fighting now would only ensure his destruction. Slowly, with the reluctance of a man who has never surrendered anything in his life, Victor Castellano raised his hands. The arrest took hours. Elena watched from the brownstone as federal agents processed Castellano and his men, as evidence was collected, as statements were taken. Dominic stayed by her side the whole time, a silent pillar of support. When dawn finally broke over Manhattan, Victor Castellano was in federal custody, facing charges that would keep him imprisoned for the rest of his natural life. Elena stood on the brownstone's rooftop, watching the sun rise over the city her parents had loved. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, and more uncertain about the future than she had ever been. But she was also, for the first time she could remember, free. Dominic joined her as the sky turned pink and gold. "It's over," he said quietly. "Is it?" Elena turned to face him. "What happens now? To the organization, to all the people who depend on it? That's up to you." Dominic's expression was peaceful, unburdened in a way she had never seen. "You're Marco's heir. You can lead them wherever you want to go." Elena thought about everything she had learned in the past few weeks, about her father's vision of protection and loyalty, about her mother's dedication to truth, about the grandmother who had prayed for her return, the family who had welcomed her home. "I want to build something new," she said finally, "something legitimate. The resources this organization has, the connections, the influence, they could do so much good if they were used the right way. Foundations, shelters, job training programs, real protection for people who need it." Dominic smiled. "Your father talked about that once, a long time ago before things got complicated. He wanted to leave the shadow world behind to give you a different kind of inheritance. Then let's finish what he started." They stood together in the morning light, watching the city wake up, imagining what it might become. Chapter 6, 1 year later. The Russo Foundation occupied the top 3 floors of a building in Midtown Manhattan, a building that had once housed some of Victor Castellano's most profitable illegal operations. Elena had taken particular satisfaction in transforming it into something her parents would have been proud of. She stood at her office window, watching the city sparkle beneath a winter snowfall. On her desk was a stack of reports: grant applications approved, shelters funded, job placement programs expanded. The organization her father had built in shadow now operated in daylight, helping thousands of people every year. It hadn't been easy. There had been skeptics both inside and outside the old organization. Some had left, unable to adapt to the new way of doing things. Others had surprised her with their enthusiasm, their relief at finally being able to use their skills for something unambiguously good. Sophia had become her right hand, managing operations with the same fierce efficiency she had once devoted to less legal endeavors. Marcus still watched over Elena, though his role now was more executive protection than criminal enforcement. Even Rosa had come along, running the Foundation's community outreach programs with her characteristic warmth. And Nonna Maria, her grandmother, had lived to see it all. She had moved into a comfortable apartment near Elena's new home in the West Village, spending her days tending a garden on the rooftop and dispensing wisdom to anyone who would listen. "You've done well," she told Elena over Sunday dinner, just a few weeks before. Your father would be proud. Your mother too. I had help, Elena replied. I couldn't have done any of this alone. No one does anything alone, child. That's what your father understood. Strength isn't about being independent. It's about knowing who to trust, knowing who to love. Elena thought about that now, watching the snow fall over Manhattan, about trust and love, and the family she had found in the most unlikely of places. A knock at her door interrupted her reverie. Dominic stepped in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might need this, he said, handing her one. Thank you, she smiled. Their relationship had evolved over the past year, no longer mentor and student but partners, equals, something more, though neither of them had found the words for it yet. The board meeting went well, Dominic said, settling into the chair across from her desk. Everyone approved the new housing initiative. We should be able to break ground by spring. Good. And the FBI? Any updates on Castellano's trial? Verdict came in this morning. Guilty on all counts. He'll be in prison for the rest of his life. Eleanor absorbed this news quietly. She had expected it, but hearing confirmation still carried weight. It's really over, she said softly. It's really over. Dominic paused, studying her face. How do you feel? I'm not sure. Eleanor turned back to the window, watching a group of children playing in the snow in the park below. I spent so long not knowing who I was, where I came from. Then I found out, and everything changed. But now, she shrugged, now I'm just trying to figure out what comes next. You've already figured it out, Dominic said. You're building something better, something that will outlast all of us. Maybe, Eleanor smiled, but it's not about legacy anymore. It's about the people we help, the lives we change. That's what matters. Dominic rose and joined her at the window. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the snow continue to fall. Your father used to stand at windows like this, he said eventually, watching the city, thinking about all the people out there who needed someone to fight for them. And you stood with him? Always. Just like I'll stand with you. Elena reached out and took his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of everything they had been through, the revelations, the danger, the transformation, the journey from a simple dress at a party to this moment of peace. Thank you, she said, for everything, for protecting me all those years, for believing I could become something more. I always knew what you could become, Dominic replied. I was just waiting for you to see it yourself. They stood together as the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white, softening its hard edges. Somewhere out there, the Foundation's shelters were providing warmth to people who had none. Somewhere out there, families were eating meals paid for by grants Eleanor had approved. Somewhere out there, the world was becoming a little bit better because a girl in a simple dress had refused to let cruelty define her. Elena thought of her parents, Marco and Sarah, whose love had created her, whose deaths had set her journey in motion. She thought of her grandmother, praying for her return. She thought of all the people who had welcomed her into a family she had never known she had, and she felt for the first time in her life that she was exactly where she was meant to be. That evening, Eleanor visited her grandmother. They sat together in Maria's cozy living room, drinking tea and watching the snow pile up on the rooftop garden. I have something for you, Maria said, producing a small wooden box from a drawer. I've been saving it since your father died, waiting for the right moment. Eleanor opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple silver, set with a small sapphire that caught the light like a piece of captured sky. It was your mother's, Maria explained. Marco gave it to her when they got engaged. She asked me to keep it safe in case anything ever happened. She wanted you to have it someday. Eleanor slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. I wish I could have known them, she whispered. They're with you, Maria said firmly. In everything you do, everything you've become. They would be so proud of you, Elena, not because of the power or the money,